Beat it. That's what Ohio State hopes to do this Saturday in State College, PA, as they take on the Nittany Lions. Welcome, everybody, to Men of Scarlet and Gray Live, our 10th episode already of the year. Time's flying. As always, your host, Josh Schott. You can follow me on Twitter, @ShottJosh. And, of course, as always, our entertaining and informative Men of Scarlet and Gray writers joining us. As always, Shannon is always controversial with his poll rankings on the site. You can follow him on Twitter @SMSOMMERS84. Shannon, how you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you, Dr. Josh.
Dr. Josh is my other persona. He's not on here right now. Chip,
we'll get him out. We'll get him out.
Yeah, he'll show up midway through the show when we're talking about Illinois or something. But Chip, you can follow him on Twitter @ChipMinnick. Chip, how you doing today? I got your name right this week, so no worries.
No worries at all, and I'm doing well. Thank you for asking.
I hear you, Shannon. Andrew, you can follow him on Twitter @Bucknut22. Andrew, how you doing today?
What's going on, everyone? Doing good, can't complain.
That's good to hear. So we got a big show to talk about. Of course, we're going to talk about first Ohio State's big winner, Rutgers, the Big Ten's weekend, who's overrated and underrated in the polls, and then later in the show, of course, we'll have our usual picks and be joined by our special Penn State guest to preview the Ohio State-Penn State game. But, of course, first we're talking about Ohio State's big win last weekend over the Rutgers Scarlet Knight, 56-17. The game really wasn't ever close. The Buckeyes were pretty much dominated the entire game. Rutgers never really had a sniff at having a shot at really winning this game. JT Barrett, of course, continued his stellar season.
Heisman
stats here. Yeah, we're going to talk about that maybe later in the show. He threw for 261 yards and 3 touchdowns, and he rushed for 107 yards and 2 touchdowns. Guys, it was a pretty dominating performance by the Buckeyes on all ends, not just Barrett. We'll start with you, Andrew. What were your thoughts on Ohio State's big win?
It was good to see them. I thought Rutgers would have came out with a quick spark, especially from their solid defensive line. I thought the offense would have had a tough time going in the first quarter, but they got going early. And I just wanted to say a quick fact. I love that they haven't had to punt in the first quarter. I believe they said since the Virginia Tech game, which is awesome. And we really saw JT. He can make plays with his feet. You know, he ran for 107 yards. He's obviously not as shifty as Braxton Miller, but he's a solid runner, and we saw that against Rutgers. And another fact, the offense went to the tight ends more, which was very nice to see.
Yeah, Nick Vannett had himself a pretty big game. He had 2 catches for 2 touchdowns. Even Hireman, he even got involved with the offense a little bit well, but he hasn't been as featured as much as I thought he would this season. But Chip, your thoughts on the Buckeyes' dominant performance?
Well, I predicted last week. I thought it was going to be closer, more into the second half. I thought I predicted 42-21, and obviously Ohio State won 56-17. And Coach Urban Meyer is not allowing his players to become complacent, because I read a quote from Darren Lee where Lee said, quote, "We just beat this team pretty badly and it almost felt like a loss," end quote. So if I have, again, I'm going to sound kind of like a broken record here, but if I have any nitpicking, and I agree that, Shannon, with like the little Heisman quote, JT Barrett, I think it'd be fair to say, has exceeded every Ohio State's fans in terms of his performance up until this point. The one nitpicking thing that I guess I'm always leery of is keeping in JT Barrett late in the game when the game was well decided, because Cardale Jones needs to get some reps in the event Barrett sustains an injury. And I understand that Barrett has only started 6 games. That's the reason why, given up from the coaching staff for keeping Barrett in. But all it takes is one play, and Cardale Jones will be thrust into the starting lineup. And giving Jones at least the fourth quarter would make me feel a lot better with the November Big Ten stretch run on the horizon. Like I said, I'm probably the only one that, again, you're really grasping at straws when after a 56-17 win, and you have somebody like me saying, I wish we saw more of the backups, but they're looking dominant. Ohio State's looking like they've just completely turned the corner from the Virginia Tech loss at the beginning of September.
Yeah, I kind of have to agree with you there. Barrett, I thought he did stay on a little longer than he should have. He actually took a couple of big hits there on those final series he was on. So I understand definitely where you're coming from. I think Jones, though, I don't know. I don't know. I can see why they had Barrett out there, but at the same time, I see why he was kind of left out there a little too long. When Jones does need some time, he should be able to get some time in these next two games, especially the Illinois game, because that's going to be a massacre. But we'll talk about that game, of course, more next week. Shannon, your thoughts on Ohio State's dominating performance?
They played this weekend? I thought it was another bye week.
I'm sick of those.
Yeah, no. Well, this goes to show you that sometimes, not all the time, does bye weeks help a team, Chip. Because, Rutgers was on a bye week also, and I think they were still on a bye when they came to Columbus.
I completely understand. And that's, if anything, I seem to recall back in the preseason predictions, I said Rutgers has a bye week, but guess who also has a bye week at the same time? Ohio State. So they didn't even get the advantage of that. So
yeah,
it's kind of a push.
It definitely got wiped out. The thing that impressed me the most about the game, it seemed like, if you're reading up the stats and everything before the game, a lot of Ohio State's weaknesses matched up, or a lot of Rutgers' strengths matched up with a lot of Ohio State's weaknesses. And it got me, had me a little nervous, and that's why I went really conservative on my guess of like 36-21 for my final score. I was worried about that pass rush. I mean, they come in leading the Big Ten with, 24 sacks, and they never touched Barrett once. The offensive line never gave up one single sack, which was amazing and huge. That was very impressive. The secondary, they gave up a couple of big pass plays, but not anything really major. And I agree, they need to get Jones in more in the fourth quarter, and I think, Penn State game and like Josh said, the Illinois game, I think you're going to see him in there. But yeah, that was pure dominance. I mean, the last 2 weeks, Maryland or, Rutgers, welcome to the Big Ten.
They've been initiated.
Yeah.
They know the pecking order.
Yeah.
What was that saying? You've been tried, or I forget that whole, you've been found wanting.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but
One thing Maryland Rutgers fans can't hang their hat on is they're not as bad as Michigan and Illinois.
No.
They're arguably the third and fourth best, or the four. I would put them fourth and fifth best behind Minnesota, Michigan State, and Ohio State.
And Rutgers comes into the game 5-1, and you can sit there and say what you want to say about Rutgers, but Ohio State gave them their worst loss in 12 seasons, and they've had some decent teams in that within that 12 seasons, and to walk out of the shoe for the first time with the worst loss in 12 seasons, that was pretty impressive. I know there's a lot of Rutgers fans that were getting mad that Urban was going for it in fourth and whatever when the game's out of hand, and I'm like, yeah, that's what Urban does. He's got to go for style points. Got to get the score up there because, like we will talk about later with the polls, we still can't get any kind of love in the polls. Yeah, even with the dominant win.
Well, you won't hear an Ohio State fan complain about Urban's mentality of continuing to put points on the board after 10 years of Tressel, after getting a 3-touchdown lead, running the ball 3 times up the middle, and then punting it.
Yeah.
Because that conservative style made me lose a few years of my life.
I agree. As much as I love Tressel and as much winning as he did, and the national championship he brought, yeah, that. I agree.
I don't mind. I guess getting back to the whole Cardale Jones thing, where I guess I'm thinking of like other players like Bryante Dunn or Warren Ball or even Rod Smith to a lesser extent, I don't mind the idea of, all right, you want to, I guess maybe I'm just kind of old school in the sense of, all right, you want to run your offense, but I think there's something to be said about, okay, we don't necessarily need to throw for the end zone. You know what I'm saying? Like last year when Ohio State, when they were just embarrassing Florida A&M, and that was a game that should never have been scheduled. Even Urban Meyer in the second half, he was just running the ball. I mean, it was just basically, it's like, if you can't stop us from running the ball, there's not much I can do to help you. You know, but I guess I'm just old school in the sense of, all right, when you're up, there's no sense in rubbing someone's nose in it. That's just, I guess I'm just, like I said, I'm just kind of old school that way.
Tell that to Penn State fans last year.
Oh.
I remember last year they sat there and they complained about urban run score, and they did exactly what you said, Chip. They were running the ball, and Penn State couldn't stop it. Hopefully they are able to do a little bit better job this year of that. Otherwise, we'll probably hear similar comments. But moving on, anything other thoughts, guys, on the Buckeyes win before we take a look at what the Big Ten did this past weekend?
It was dominant. They're getting better every week.
I agree with something that Shannon said, is that Urban Meyer, make no mistake about it, he is very much aware of, he may not say it, but he's very much aware of the importance of style points, and I don't find it at all coincidental that Ohio State's been putting up over 50 points the last several games, trying to get the team back in a positive light in the eyes of the voting public, or at least the College Football Playoff Committee.
Not at the four-letter network. They came out with a post, I believe it was yesterday or today, and they came out and said, Ohio State's back. Beware.
They should say that.
When do we leave?
Well, we don't think we left. But everybody wrote us off after the Virginia Tech loss. Everybody wrote off, Michigan State. And now all of a sudden, you got, there is talk that there is a potential of having a Big Ten team in the playoff game because of you got two powerhouses. Because there's two teams and then there's the rest of the Big Ten. That's what it is. I mean, yeah, there's two other undefeated teams, but in all actuality, there's two teams in the Big Ten right now, and there's everybody else.
Well, Minnesota, be fair to them, they're solid this year.
They're solid, but I mean,
outside of those three, there's not. I don't know. Maybe you could throw Nebraska in the conversation too, but I get what you're saying. That there's only two teams in the Big Ten that are worthy of being in the national conversation.
Right. I mean, there's four. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Good.
I was going to say it's with all, and Josh, you know where I'm going. That when you brought up Minnesota, it's absolutely imperative for Ohio State fans that Minnesota keeps winning between now and November 15th, because Ohio State needs that boost of playing against a team that only has one loss. They need all the opponents from here on out have to be considered. Like Nebraska has to run the table and be undefeated in the Big Ten West. So if Ohio State wins the East, they're playing against a team with only one loss in the West. Anything that they can do to improve their standing in the eyes of that playoff committee.
I'm looking at the schedule for Minnesota. They're at Illinois this weekend. That'll be a win.
Wow.
Then they get a bye the following weekend, and then when we play Michigan State, they host Iowa. So there's no reason why they can't win that game too. So they can conceivably be. What was
Seven
it?
and
7-1. Yeah, 7-1 heading into the game against Ohio State, with their only loss being the 37 loss to TCU earlier this year. That was at TCU, and that is looking like a pretty darn good loss right now.
Doesn't look bad. Yeah.
But Ohio State, they dominated Rutgers. We'll see what's in store this week for Penn State when we talk about that later in the show. So we'll take a look now at the Big Ten this past weekend. There are the results of those games. Michigan State actually won their game by the exact identical score as Ohio State, beating Indiana 56-17. That game wasn't ever really close because Indiana's running out of quarterbacks. Nebraska pretty much dominated Northwestern 38-17. That game was I thought it would be a lot closer. Maryland, Iowa had a pretty interesting game. It was close throughout, but they pulled off a touchdown victory, 38-31.
I called
it. And then Minnesota and Purdue with actually probably the best Big Ten game of the week, won 39-38 at home to keep their undefeated Big Ten record intact. So we'll start with you, Shannon. What did you think of the Big Ten results this past weekend?
I don't know who else because I didn't write it down, so if anybody else called it, I apologize. But I called Maryland over Iowa.
I did too.
I picked Purdue. I picked Purdue over Minnesota because, and they almost got it. But like Chip said, we need Minnesota to, keep winning. That was a pretty good game. I thought the way that game started out when Purdue threw the interception for the touchdown, that, that game was going to be over real quick. But Purdue showed that they have heart, they have toughness, so don't sleep on Purdue. Like we've been talking week after week after week. They're getting better. And there's not really, there's not much you can say against, about Michigan State. I mean, yeah, they beat, Indiana by the same score that we beat Rutgers, but yeah, hey, Rutgers was 5-1. Indiana was what, 3-3, 3-2.
But they beat the future SEC East champion.
Yeah. Without that, yeah, their third string quarterback that they had to burn a red shirt for. That's how bad their quarterback situation is.
Did they though? I thought it was their fourth string.
Well, it was the third or fourth string that I know they had to burn a red shirt for somebody, but I have to play them.
They're getting low. They're going to be like Maryland was a couple years ago, where they had to stick a linebacker at quarterback.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, in Nebraska, it looks like, they might have, fixed some of their problems. Tommy Armstrong looked pretty good. And that beast Abdullah.
Yeah, he should be in the Heisman conversation. I'm surprised more are talking about him, of course, with the one loss in Ohio State, Michigan State overshadowing them. They pretty much have to win out, too, and hope Ohio State, Michigan State, the winner of that, also wins out because, I mean, they could, if enough upsets would fall, they could get themselves in the playoff discussion, but a lot would have to happen because their schedule, their out of conference schedule is pretty weak too, like Ohio State's and like Ohio State's schedule. Chip, what were your thoughts on the Big Ten this past weekend?
Well, I mean, we were just talking about Maryland. Obviously, they've been a great addition to the Big Ten. They're well positioned to get a bowl berth by the season's end, and I'm not really sure what to make of Iowa in the Big Ten West because their season gets more challenging coming up. I mean, we just discussed they're playing Minnesota. They're going to be playing Nebraska. I don't know what to make of Iowa, and Purdue looks like a team that is going to play the role of the spoiler the rest of the season. Right now they're 3-5, and it's not looking. I'm not saying that it's impossible for them to make a bowl game, but I'm looking at their schedule. Like they're off this weekend, but then they go to Nebraska. They play Wisconsin. They play Northwestern. Both of them at home, and then they finish up the season at Indiana. So they should be able to. They'll beat Indiana. They could probably beat Northwestern. It's not beyond the realm of possibility that they could beat Wisconsin. So I would look at kind of what Shannon and I have been saying and others have been saying is I think Purdue is definitely a team that I don't think I would necessarily be anxious to play as the Big Ten season winds down. And we've been discussing Minnesota, and I think both Nebraska and Northwestern. I mean, Nebraska handled Northwestern far easier than I anticipated, but they both seem to be playing well as both teams head into November. And again, Michigan State is the juggernaut that we have to face in a few weeks. So we'll see, come November 8th, how that's all going to shake out.
Yeah, it's Purdue's very sneaky, and I think next season they're going to definitely be a team to watch out in the Big Ten West next season because Hazel really seems to have them to go in the right direction. Appleby at QB, he's been having he's been pretty solid ever since he's taken over the starting role, and they're a dark horse for the bowl this season. But regardless, I think they will ruin somebody's season some way somehow. Andrew, your thoughts on the slate of Big Ten games this past weekend?
Yeah, first I like to say that is a good point with Purdue about them spoiling someone's season because that is highly likable to happen. And I was watching the Iowa-Maryland game. I actually picked Iowa in that game. That game was very exciting with Iowa coming back in the fourth with that onside kick. And then not surprised with the Michigan State-Indiana. That game was just another blowout. And I thought Northwestern would have kept it a little closer with Nebraska since we saw like 2 or 3 good wins out of Northwestern, but Nebraska handled them pretty well, especially in the second half. So it was a good weekend of games.
Yeah, the Big Ten. Who would have thought Minnesota-Purdue was actually higher scoring than West Virginia-Baylor? I never saw that one coming.
No way.
Yeah, that was a pretty big upset. By the way, I called that one. I have to gloat a little bit about my picks, picking West Virginia over Baylor.
Overtime.
Yeah, I was happy about that pick. I did a lot better with my picks this past weekend compared to the previous week. Stupid Mac and Sunbelt keep costing me. Yeah, they're little games. Everyone's 2 or 3 win teams, and you have no idea how they're going to play. But we'll move on now to our discussion about the polls. Our special guest has joined us now. I don't know if he feels like joining this discussion and doing our picks, and we'll get to the Ohio State-Penn State game. But our special guest joining us, Kevin McGuire, a writer for NittanyLionsDen.com and a contributor for NBC Sports College Football Talk. You can follow him on Twitter at Kevin on CFB. Kevin, you want to discuss the poll situation with us right now, and welcome to the show.
First of all, thanks for having me. Hopefully I'm coming through okay, and yeah, I'll talk about anything you want to talk about. Let's go.
Awesome, that's great to hear. That's the kind of guest we want to have here on the Scarlet and Gray Live. So let's talk about now the polls, as I was saying. It's pretty obvious. The preseason polls every year they're pretty much crap. And they're proven to be again this year. South Carolina was a top 10 team, and now they're not even ranked, for example. So I went off on a rant on Twitter about this. I want to hear what you guys have to say first. We'll start with you, Kevin. Your thoughts on the polls, the AP poll, using preseason polls, and when they should actually be starting to use the polls in the season.
Yeah, I've said for a while now that the preseason polls are really just a form of habit, I think. We've been doing them for so long, and now it's just hard to just put away with them. And I think a lot of it comes with the whole, we need something to talk about in the summer, leading up to the start of the season, I guess. And the polls are just the easiest way to do it. And I think a lot of newspapers, a lot of magazines, every media outlet has bought into that because it's been what we've been doing for so long. But, I mean, obviously, ideally, if we could hold off until a couple of games have been played, we can get a sense of an idea of where teams actually may stand, and actually, see who's going to get injured, because obviously we have injuries everywhere. It changes the way that we have opinions about these teams. So ultimately, for me, I would start doing some polls maybe at the end of September, early October. I think that's probably a good time to start it after 3 or 4 games. And I've been saying that for a while now, and I don't think it's going to change, but that's what I would do.
Yeah, it's really, you nailed it. It just gives us basically something to talk about in the summertime besides recruiting. I agree with that. Even though I said on Twitter Saturday night I would maybe start ranking the games not until November, but that would be insane, and because the media outlets know the way they can handle it. But I would be okay with it at the end of September, early October. Shannon, your thoughts on you get your thoughts out on what Kevin said and your thoughts on polls.
Well, first of all, thanks for joining the show, Kevin. And thankfully, the polls don't mean anything as far as the selection committee, because it is kind of disgusting seeing some of the stuff that's going on I'm still flabbergasted by Alabama only winning by one against no winning SEC Arkansas team and not dropping into polls, and us dominating for 4 weeks now, or 4 games, and we only move up a couple of spots. But that's besides the point. That's just my biasness. But yeah, I just as far as the preseason polls, it's just it's a popularity contest. It's the SEC and a couple of top teams in the top, a couple of the other conferences.
Yeah, and not only just the popularity contest, but bowl results. Oklahoma, for example, they got a lot of credit for beating Alabama in the Sugar Bowl going into this year's preseason polls, and as we've seen, they've already lost 2 games, and they're out of the playoff discussion pretty much.
Yeah.
One team I wanted to bring up before I get to Chip and Andrew, your thoughts on this. Mississippi State, of course, the #1 team in the country. People talked about the 3-game brutal stretch they went through, and you look back now, and that 3-game brutal stretch really doesn't look that brutal. Of course, it started at LSU when LSU was a top 10 ranked team. Mississippi State was unranked. They went to Death Valley, and they upset LSU, which I give them credit going into LSU, winning a game. That's pretty dang tough. But LSU's proven they're not a top 10 team, and they just now got back into the rankings, the bottom top 25, and they barely beat Florida, who, as we all know, is not exactly a shiningly great team this season. And then, of course, they go beat Texas A&M at home. A lot of people didn't think they could win that game. Texas A&M was a top 15 ranked team at the time. Texas A&M is having a lot of major issues right now. They're actually calling for someone's head. Some of the crazier fans are. And then Mississippi State beat Auburn. Of course, that's looking like a pretty good win right now, as Auburn still looks like a top 10 caliber team. So, Chip, what are your thoughts as I throw that example out of the polls, and who you think's been overrated?
Well, before I give you the overrated, I just want to also welcome Kevin. Thank you for joining us on the podcast. And obviously, we talked about Oklahoma. You talked about LSU, Texas A&M being tremendously overrated. I'm going to throw out a team that it didn't surprise me that they were beat this past weekend, because they should have been beaten a couple weeks ago by TCU, and that's Baylor. Because Baylor, for all of the flashy offense, I think they're just I'll just come out and say it. I think they're soft. I think they're just not. I think a physical team, either would as West Virginia or Texas Christian. I think they showed that Baylor's not a very physical team. And I think ultimately probably if you want to talk about a team that's underrated, and I think that might ultimately win the Big 12 is Kansas State. I mean, they are, I think, maybe a touchdown away from being undefeated, almost defeating Auburn. And I think, again, Auburn, I think, is a very solid team, but I think Kansas State is tremendously underrated. I've said this on previous podcasts, so this should be no exception to those previous statements I've made. I completely agree with what Kevin said earlier about there shouldn't be any kind of a poll system until after several weeks into the system, or into the season, I should say. For example, I always go back to the example of Ohio high school football. The computer polls are not released until after 4 weeks of the season. The local newspapers, they all can have the different polls, but they don't mean anything in terms of if you get into the state playoffs. So I'm just a big advocate of using strictly a strength of schedule component for any kind of rankings whatsoever, and getting rid of the idea of any kind of media poll or any kind of coaches poll, because nobody can possibly participate in these polls without any form of bias, regardless of whether we're talking a media member or a coach.
Remember, Baylor fans, you send your hate mail to @ChipMinnick on Twitter.
That's fine. That's fine. I'll send it back with hugs and kisses. That's basically what you guys did against West Virginia this past weekend, by the way.
Regarding, of course, your other point about the polls, the coaches poll to me is the biggest joke, because the coaches don't vote on them. It's the SID or the athletic director. But of course, these polls, getting rid of them isn't easy. because of course the media wouldn't want them to go away because it gives them something to talk about. We could talk about how in the coaches poll how Michigan State's ranked over Oregon, despite the fact Michigan State lost to Oregon at Oregon. But Andrew, your thoughts. We'll get your thoughts. Your thoughts on the polls.
I think we all nailed it pretty good with the Texas A&M being pretty overrated, and I agree with Chip with Baylor being overrated. I mean, I can see them picking up at least one more loss for the future season. But I mean, I'm kind of happy they don't release the playoff committee doesn't release their polls until what, I think 2 weeks, 1 week.
Next week.
Next week. Okay, so it's going to be interesting to see how their polls compare to all the AP and the coaches, the USA Today. It's going to be very interesting to see how the playoff polls compare. So I think it's nice they held off. It gives a little suspense. So it should be exciting to see.
That's a good segue into what I was going to bring up next is the playoff committee's poll. Your guys' thoughts heading into that, because we obviously this is the first season with the playoffs and their polls. Do you guys have confidence it's going to be better than the AP and the coaches poll?
Right now,
can
no.
Hop in.
I'd say right now, no. Unfortunately, I mean, it's too early to tell. I mean, I don't know. I'm at a loss for words. It's just too early to tell. I mean, there's still too much football to play.
I think one of the things is we went into the season knowing that this was going to be a new format, a new system, and everything. But we have assumptions of how it's going to work. But until we actually see this committee doing their job, starting with this ranking that they're going to be putting out, we don't really know what they're thinking, what they're looking at, and how they're going to be judging things. How are they going to judge Oregon's win against Michigan State against something that happens in the SEC. We have assumptions, and we probably suspect that they're going to go by the conventional wisdom that we've been using for years now as far as the regular polls are concerned. But until we actually see that process playing out, it's kind of hard to predict exactly what's going to happen.
Yeah, we have no precedent. We have no precedent for this situation, and a lot of people said the controversy was going to go away with the BCS. Well, to me, the controversy's got to be even louder with this playoff system, because now, instead of like 5 or 6 teams arguing they should have been in the top 2, we're going to have like 10 or 12 teams arguing, oh, we should be in the top 4. We should be in the top 4. And the way it's playing out now with in terms of undefeated teams, there's only a possibility, I believe, for 2 teams now: the winner of Ole Miss, Mississippi State, and Marshall. And I don't see Marshall being in the playoff conversation with their really weak schedule. But one one-loss team or 2 one-loss teams are going to definitely get in to the playoffs. Getting to my next question for you guys. Do you see 2 SEC teams making it?
I'm going to give you the horrible "it depends" answer. And what I mean by that is the hypothetical is everyone knows that at the end of the season, Mississippi and Mississippi State play, right? So let's say that they're both undefeated and they play in the Egg Bowl, and I mean, just flip a coin, it doesn't matter. I'll just say that Mississippi State wins that one. But when they defeat Mississippi, it's a really close game. And then let's say Georgia, who only has 1 loss on the other side, they play for the SEC championship. Georgia defeats one of the Mississippi schools in a very close game in the SEC championship. That's how I see 2 SEC teams getting in, is that they can point and say, you see how close we were in terms of how good these teams were. I could see it winding up something like that.
So in that scenario, Georgia would obviously be a playoff position, but you would put the loser of the Mississippi State game in the playoffs over the loser of the SEC championship game.
I'm saying that I could see how that would be a plausible argument. I'm not necessarily sure that that's how it's going to shake out. I just think the national narrative is already starting to pick up on, Josh, to your, I don't want to say that your statement, but the idea, I don't want to say the possibility. It seems to me like they're starting to become more of a national narrative for the probability of 2 SEC teams. Maybe Kevin has a different perspective on it, but that's just, again, that's kind of everything that the different podcasts, different Twitter feeds that I read and subscribe to. Seems more and more like that chorus is starting to become more and more for 2 SEC teams.
Yeah, I think that's probably the most likely scenario that the SEC would need to get 2 teams into the playoff, the way you mapped it out with Mississippi State and Ole Miss, because, like you said, one of them is going to lose. It's just a matter of, can they avoid losing before that? And personally, I don't think that they will. I think that they each have a loss coming at them before that Egg Bowl, I think. I just look at Alabama. They're going to get Mississippi State at home. They're going to get Auburn at home. I still think you have to at least consider that Alabama has enough in them to make a run here. So I don't think we're going to enter that scenario specifically, but that's the only way I see it playing out. So I don't think it's going to happen, but I could see that being a possibility where you have to at least have the consideration there. But ultimately, when it comes down to it, I think that this committee, assuming that you have one-loss champions in the Pac-12, Big 12, of the Big 10, I don't see enough room for a second SEC team, especially if there's a Notre Dame team at the end of the year with one loss too. I mean, there's going to be a lot of candidates out there, and if this selection committee is really going to reward teams for conference championships, I think that that's something that's going to go against the SEC at the end.
I'm glad you brought up Notre Dame, because I was going to lead to what I was going to ask you guys next. And I agree with you, Kevin and Chip. That's the only scenario I see the SEC getting 2 teams with so much parity across the top of college football right now is Notre Dame, a one-loss Notre Dame team. How do you predict the committee will handle that situation? Because obviously they don't have a conference championship game.
Well, and I'm trying to measure my words carefully so Shannon doesn't come through the airwaves and start beating me, profusely for speaking positively about Notre Dame. But the reality is that Notre Dame, say what you will about the pass interference call that should have been called or should not have been called, I believe that Notre Dame gained a tremendous amount of national respect by their performance against Florida State. That's just, again, based on, it sounds to me like the national media is really looking at the fact that, okay, they went into Florida State Stadium and played far better than most people anticipated and could have won that game, to the idea that, yeah, they don't have a conference championship, but they have, some games like against Arizona State and USC that might be able to trip them up. If, as an Ohio State fan or a Big Ten fan, a little more generically, hoping that the Big Ten champion gets a more than a passing glance from the committee, can only hope that Notre Dame gets tripped up, because I think, again, people are going to look back at how well that they played against Florida State and say, yeah, they should get a shot at the title.
They should have picked a conference. That's all I'm going to say.
Yeah,
they've had plenty of time knowing what they were getting themselves into, and they keep saying that we're scheduling all these teams in order to put on this big, huge resume and impress the playoff committee in the future and blah 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 blah. Pick a conference.
The one thing I would point out, and I'm not disagreeing with you, by the way, but what I was going to point out is they've got the sweetheart deal with the ACC, where they basically, I think they get 5 games per season against ACC opponents, and then I see Kevin kind of nodding his head in agreement. So yeah, at any point, and I realize I'm talking to a contributor to NBC Sports, so at any point, if I'm misspeaking, let me know. But the point I was going to make about Notre Dame is, all right, so they play 5 games against ACC opponents. They also have their traditional Navy, Stanford, USC games, And guess what? At the end of the year, if they don't qualify for one of the playoff spots, they can possibly take one of the ACC's bowl slots. Am I right, Kevin? Does that sound pretty accurate?
Yeah, that's pretty accurate, and it is a good deal for the ACC as well, because it adds another game against Notre Dame, and if they're going to be evaluating Notre Dame as a power conference equivalent team, that bolsters the ACC strength of schedule too. So, yeah.
So why don't we just nail it down and say that Notre Dame is the ACC? I mean, it's
Dude, that's what should happen.
Catholics don't want to commit. Oh, I'm sorry.
Not going there.
It's going to be a good argument if they run the table.
I think if you're Notre Dame, or if you're rooting against Notre Dame, if Notre Dame ends the year with one loss, you're hoping that Arizona State drops out of the poll. You're hoping that USC drops out of the poll, because all of a sudden, at the end of the year, Notre Dame doesn't have a single win against the top 25 team. That's assuming that Stanford doesn't, stay in there as well. I mean, Stanford has been struggling too. So, their only marquee game, so quote unquote, would be against Florida State, and they come up with a loss. Controversial, sure, but that's what you have to be looking at if you're going to be stacking up resumes. How many top 25 teams have you won? Now, I mean, look, if Ohio State goes at the end of the year, ends the year with one loss, they will have done so very likely against a ranked Michigan State team, possibly a ranked Nebraska team in the Big Ten championship. Forgive me if I'm forgetting another team along the way, but I mean, if you have to start stacking up resumes, all of a sudden a school like Ohio State starts to have a better overall resume, you would think, than what Notre Dame would have.
And one more point I would like to add on to that about the Notre Dame and the ACC is, how good is the ACC really this year? Outside of Florida State and Clemson, I'm personally not as impressed by the ACC this year. I think Florida State, in my opinion, they're not as good as their ranking says they are. That's just my opinion.
Oh, come
I feel
on.
the same way.
Well,
Jameson Winston's going to chase you down with some crab legs and beat you.
Oh, here we go.
no, hey, just to play devil's advocate here, and I realize I'm on an Ohio State podcast, but Josh, you just pointed out that the ACC doesn't look that imposing outside of Florida State and Clemson, and that's what the playoff committee is going to say is, look, Ohio State lost. Ohio State lost to Virginia Tech of the ACC.
Yep.
That loss does not look good for the
That's what I'm
Buckeyes.
saying. I think the way somebody pointed out is that loss to Virginia Tech stinks worse than milk that's been spilled on a Las Vegas sidewalk that's been in the scorching heat all day.
Yeah, but that was the second game of the season, and the key there is if you've improved since then, and how you've rebounded from that. The biggest thing is, the key thing is where your losses are at in your season, and it was nice having it at the beginning of the season.
I agree with that. I'm just merely, again, there's going to be a lot for that committee to be able to not only look at but then have to defend. If I'm Jeff Long, who's the chairman of that committee, or if I'm Tom Osborne, or if I'm Condoleezza Rice, for that matter, any of those, and I'm just thinking of off the top of my head, like people that I know, Barry Alvarez, that are members of that committee, I think that they have to kind of justify, all right, why these 4 teams made it and teams number 5 through 6, 7, 8, etc. did not. So, they have to be able to kind of not only, be willing to take the praise, but also take the slings and arrows of fans like us that are going to be wanting some answers as to why Ohio State or Notre Dame or whoever that has one loss is being left out in relation to, possibly 2 SEC teams.
Well, bottom line, and like they've been, talking more and more lately, is that they are trying to make an emphasis on conference championships. And not saying that if you win a conference championship, you're in, but you've got a better chance of getting in if you win your conference championship, depending on your conference, obviously, but than you do if you don't win. So, like a Big Ten conference championships, got a better chance of hopefully getting in than a second team in the SEC that might have played in the SEC championship game and lost.
That's exactly how it should be, in my opinion.
If anything, guess what? I feel very comfortable predicting is as soon as the 4 teams are announced, they're going to say we need to make it up to 8 because no matter what, I see Kevin smiling because quite frankly, there's always going to be why didn't we, team 5, team 6, why didn't we get in? I think
exactly.
As soon as we, the problem with the BCS, there was only 2. And as Josh pointed out earlier, all right, the controversy is only going to swell as soon as the 4 teams are announced. You can mark that one down as we've got to have it, strictly conference champions, and it has to be 8 teams like that. That you can pretty much guarantee.
Yeah, I don't know where you guys stood on the whole BCS versus playoff debate in the last couple of years. Personally, I've always kind of liked the idea of a playoff, and maybe this is a step in that direction, solving more problems. But I think all we're doing right now is expanding the arguments from who's number 3 to who's number 5, because we'll have so many schools that are going to be left on the outside looking in, even though we're expanding the opportunity to play for the national championship. So I think right now that's the only thing that I see that's really changing, I think.
Absolutely, and they have to go to 8 soon. They have to go to 8. As you said, Kevin, it's went from number 3 to number 5 now. So after a couple years of, well, my team didn't make it, and my team didn't make it, and we beat so-and-so and so who was ranked this, and yet they make it, and they didn't even play in their conference championship, I think it's inevitable we get 8 teams or more. I would go even larger than that. I would go up to like 16 teams.
Nah, you're going to go too far now.
I'd love to see 8 in the next couple of years.
I like 16 because then you're allowing for every conference champion.
That's fair too. At least they got to expand it.
Are you going to cut down on your regular season games then?
I would probably cut down on the regular season games, and then I would also, which I think was a huge mistake by the playoff committee, regardless of whether we're talking the present system or any system that would be 8 or 16, is those games need to be on site on campuses. The idea of fans traveling all around the country to bowl sites, that's another thing I feel very comfortable predicting is just you wait until you start hearing about how expensive it is to be able to fly from let's say like the Rose Bowl, which is one of the semifinal games, down to, okay, well, my team was lucky enough to make it there, and now guess what? They won the Rose Bowl, and I want to go to Jerry's World for the national national championship game. Nobody can afford to do that. No, the average fan cannot afford to do that. That's why they should have kept all of the playoff games as like the higher ranked team would get a home playoff site.
No, that's a good point right there, because Urban made a comment of that during his media days, that, how is it fair to the parents that can't afford that, that they're not going to be able to watch their, sons play in, if they make it to the Rose Bowl and then go over to Texas Stadium and play in a national championship game. They're not going to be able to afford it. And these are, the parents we're talking about, not even just, regular fans.
That's what I've always said. My ideal playoff system is the 16 teams, and the games are hosted on campus. The national title game, they could put that at a neutral site, so they keep the aura of that, or they want to go Jerry's World or whatever. But have them at the campuses, because how cool would it be to see Ohio State? I know some of the fans wouldn't like this, but Ohio State playing, let's say, Auburn at the Horseshoe in the middle of December. And snow, it's pouring down snow, and have like a Snow Bowl kind of atmosphere in a playoff game. That would be pretty neat to me.
That'd be awesome.
Yeah, it would be.
It'd be exciting.
Because the Division III playoffs, almost every year their national title game is in the snow, because the Stag Bowl, of course, being played in Virginia. But we talked a lot longer than I thought we would on this poll issue, because we could keep talking about this all night. So we're not going to do our national picks like we always do. We're just going to go to the Big Ten picks and then go to the of course, Ohio State-Penn State game preview. But we'll look at the Big Ten slate of games this weekend. The first game up, Rutgers at number 16, Nebraska. Rutgers, of course, coming off the big loss to Ohio State. Nebraska win over Wildcats. Nebraska looking like the favorite in the West, along with Minnesota. But who do you guys like in this one, the Huskers or the Scarlet Knights? We'll start with you, Kevin.
I like Nebraska, especially since they're playing at home. If the game is being played at Rutgers, I'd give them a little bit more of a fighting chance because they certainly have played tougher at home. But I just don't have enough faith that Rutgers can go on the road and win at Nebraska this week.
Shannon?
Yeah, I'm going with Nebraska because I don't think they're going to be able to shut down Abdullah and Armstrong.
Chip?
I agree. Nebraska is going to be too much for Rutgers.
Andrew?
Yeah, I have to agree. Rutgers coming off a tough game and going to Nebraska, it's going to be too hard for them.
I think Rutgers will put up a fight at first, but the game being in Lincoln and Abdullah just continuing to eat opposing defenses, I think Nebraska rolls in this one too. So moving on, Minnesota, Illinois. Gophers roll in this one, right, guys?
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
Shouldn't be much of a problem, I think, for Minnesota.
Yeah, the Fighting Illini have no fight.
No, Minnesota goes out and spanks them.
They're going to get Will Muschamp next year. They're going to get Will Muschamp. They're going to be fixed.
See, I told you Dr. Josh was going to come out.
He's a winner, man. He's got to lead them to the promised land next year. Once he gets out of Gainesville, Muschamp's going to be the greatest coach in Illinois history. But I digress. Moving on, Maryland at Wisconsin. This one's a pretty interesting matchup to me, guys. Both teams are kind of they're decent. They're not great teams. Wisconsin's notoriously good at home. Who do you guys like in this one, the Badgers or the Terrapins? We'll start with you, Andrew.
Just the fact that it's at Camp Randall and, you know, Melvin Gordon's just been playing very well. I have to go with Wisconsin here.
Chip?
Yeah, Wisconsin's figured out all they need to do is run the ball, and that's going to be, I think it'll be they'll be too physical for Maryland to handle.
Kevin?
I think Maryland has a chance to make this interesting, but ultimately I'm going with you guys. I think Wisconsin playing at home, Wisconsin's looked shaky this season. I can't have a whole ton of faith in them, but I think they get this one done.
Shannon?
Yeah, I agree with Kevin. Maryland has a chance, but, you know, with the quarterback situation with Wisconsin, but Maryland seems that, you know, they're not very good at stopping the run, especially against a power back like Gordon. So I'm going with the Badgers.
Yeah, I'm going to make it 5 in a row. The game being in Camp Randall, the Badgers rarely lose at home. So I like Wisconsin this one too. So the final Big Ten matchup, one of the most heated rivalries in the Big Ten. It's lost a little heat though because one of the teams isn't quite up to par as their tradition suggests. Michigan at number 8, Michigan State. The Wolverines, I don't give them much chance. Do you think Sparty rolls in this one, guys?
I'm going little brother.
Michigan State is going to roll Michigan by 3 touchdowns, and Wolverine fans can thank former running back Mike Hart for his soundbite of calling Michigan State little brother back in 2007, because Mark D'Antonio even mentioned in his press conference today about that, even though that was 7 years ago. So you can, I feel extremely confident. I believe the point spread is 17. And I'm saying Michigan State rolls by 3 touchdowns.
You're only going 3 touchdowns?
I feel a little generous. Maybe little brother's going to ease up on big brother. And
no. I think little brother's going to take big brother to the woodshed.
This is going to be bad.
This one. I mean, after watching that Michigan Penn State game where, you know, the battle of 3 and outs. Yeah, I see that Michigan State defense just dominating that offensive line, and Denard's just going to be limping all over the field, taking pills on the sideline again.
Yeah, I'm agreeing with you guys. I think Michigan State wins this one comfortably, and it could get very painful for Michigan if it isn't already. I guess the biggest question is does Brady Hook make it out of East Lansing? You know, It's tough watching Michigan football. I know you guys probably are getting a kick out of it, but I mean it's tough what's going on there right now.
I'm enjoying every minute of it.
It's great.
Andrew, your pick.
Oh, I think Michigan State balls them out.
Yeah, I'm gonna be. I think little brother. Yeah, they take him out behind the woodshed. It'll be at halftime. I think like 31-0, and I think they hang 50 easily on the Wolverines. And if Hoke makes it out of this weekend, he has to have dirty pictures or something of the president, because I don't understand how he's been fired yet. But Dr. Josh,
he's going to make it. He's going to make it to the end of the season.
Yeah,
He will.
Dr. Josh has got to fix their situation here soon. So, yeah. Moving on. Of course, now we'll talk about the big primetime game of the week on ABC, 8 p.m. Eastern Time. Ohio State-Penn State. Ohio State, of course, coming to the game with 1 loss. Penn State coming to the game with 2 losses, I believe. And the Nittany Lions, they're certainly the underdogs in this one. Ohio State's a 13.5-point favorite at Penn State. You usually don't see that very often. Penn State, a very hostile environment there, and Happy Valley. Kevin, I have to ask you the rivalry aspect of this game. Penn State fans, the vibe among Penn State fans. This is a rivalry game to them, right?
Yeah, I think since Penn State joined the Big Ten back in '93, Ohio State has been generally viewed as the biggest game, the biggest rivalry game from the Penn State perspective. I think enough people understand that the feeling isn't quite mutual because you guys have Michigan, but every year when the Penn State schedule comes out, when's the Ohio State game? That's going to be the whiteout game. It'll probably be a primetime matchup wherever it's being played. So certainly, Ohio State has been viewed as the chief rival on the Big Ten schedule, and when Penn State joined the conference, they had to abandon some of their other rivalries with like West Virginia and Pittsburgh, most notably. So Ohio State being right there along the border, that's always been the top program. Of course, so Ohio State has been one of the top dogs in this conference. So it's always kind of trying to aim to take them down too.
Yeah, I'm not sure about the rivalry being mutual. I view Penn State as a rival. Some Ohio State fans don't. I always look forward to this game because, as you said, Penn State fans always circle this game. I always do too because playing in Happy Valley always makes me nervous, although I'm not as nervous this season. I have to ask you, I heard a lot about Penn State having a lot of recruits in for this game. How do you I don't know. It seems like a big risk to me for Penn State to bring all these recruits in because a lot of people think Ohio State's got to win this game big. Your thoughts on their decision to do this?
Yeah, that has to be a concern to some extent, but I think ultimately, if you're James Franklin, what you're trying to do is you're trying to sell the atmosphere more than anything else. That can win over a lot of recruits. Even if it's going up against Ohio State, and you're probably going to get demolished. Selling the fact that this will be a sold-out crowd, that whiteout crowd, it's a different scene. It's something that's not typical of any other game that's on the schedule. So I think you have to take advantage of that as much as you can. And then you have to tell these recruits that this is a little bit of a rebuilding process. So you're trying to sell them on the idea of coming to this program to try and make Penn State mean something in terms of where the Big Ten pecking order is. Maybe further down the line, a playoff contender. It's a work in progress, and he's trying to sell that on the recruits as well as what he's going to have with this atmosphere that he's been looking forward to all season, I think.
Kevin, are you an alum of Penn State?
I am not. I went to a Division II school here in Pennsylvania at Shippensburg, but I've got some good family ties to Penn State, so I've been following it for a very long time, I think.
Okay, so I guess Josh already asked the question about the recruiting. I guess with so much respect I have for James Franklin, you look at the job he did at Vanderbilt, and I have every confidence that he'll get Penn State up and running, with the advantage of time and recruiting, and he's got talent with Christian Hackenberg there on hand. I guess, could you speak to, as best as after everything that Penn State has been through, what do you think, how has James Franklin helped to bridge or heal any of the divisions that existed after the departure of Joe Paterno? And then, Bill O'Brien was given a lot of credit for keeping Penn State afloat, during such a very tumultuous time. But how has James Franklin kind of bridged any of those gaps that have possibly existed from the tenure of Joe Paterno to Bill O'Brien to present day?
I think he's taking advantage of the timing of everything that's going on now because he came to Penn State with 2 years left on these sanctions, and just as the season gets started, the postseason ban and the recruiting sanctions, they get looked at. So he's able to take advantage of that, and he's kind of generated some enthusiasm for the program. Not that it wasn't there before under Bill O'Brien, but I think now things are starting to get better as far as a football perspective goes. And he's done his part in reaching out to the community. He kind of took off on some of the ideas that Bill O'Brien had when he was here for the last 2 years, getting on the bus in the off season and just speaking at all these engagements. And he lives for that kind of stuff. I mean, he seems like he always wants to be out in the open. He wants to be talking to people, meeting people, shaking hands, taking pictures with people. And that has warmed a lot of people over because the hiring of Bill O'Brien at the time was kind of complicated because of the way things ended under the Paterno era. But now that time has passed a little bit, it's been a little bit easier to go through a transition as far as smoothing things over with the alums and the fans and the letterman too. He has reached out to pretty much everybody. So I think he's been able to handle the personality part of it, but now, and the recruiting part of it, but now he's trying to find ways to actually build something on the field, which is going to just help him a little bit further along the way. And I think as long as people understand that it's a little bit of that work in progress, and they see that he's making some things and doing some things that are going to make things successful moving forward, I think he's going to continue to gel everybody back under one, Penn State banner. I think, which is it's still split in regions, but I think it's getting better, and I think he's part of that.
Who's Hackenberg's backup? Because I think we're going to have to know that for Saturday's game.
Yeah, you know what? His name actually escapes me right now, and I'm going to try and look it up. I feel bad. I should have been ready for that one, but it's O'Connor, I think. Michael O'Connor, John O'Connor.
Yeah, I had the roster from you. It's Michael O'Connor.
Yeah, Michael O'Connor. Yeah, he's a freshman. I guess there's some optimism for him going forward, and I think they're trying to redshirt him, which is going to make keeping Hackenberg extremely healthy, extremely important, because I think with the roster situation, it is what it is, and they want to try and preserve as much eligibility as they can. So if they can avoid using him this season, that would be preferable, I think.
I mean, the only reason I was asking is after watching that Penn State-Michigan game and the ease that Michigan had getting to Hackenberg and Ohio State's dominance with their defensive line, that it seems like they're not even really going to have to, do much blitzes. That, just rushing the floor, it's going to be a nightmare city for Hackenberg back there, and there's a good possibility he might get knocked out of the game.
Yeah, I mean, that's obviously a concern with the status of this offensive line, which has been really just atrocious from the start of the season. And that's probably the area of the roster that's been hit the hardest through the recruiting sanctions the last couple of years, because Bill O'Brien didn't spend a whole lot of time recruiting at that position, and that's something that I think they obviously have to focus on with this upcoming recruiting class and moving forward, so they can add some depth there as quickly as they can.
What's the thoughts of Penn State of losing a recruit to Ohio State?
Well, it doesn't make some people happy, but it's going to happen. We know that Penn State and Ohio State are going to be recruiting the same kids, and if Ohio State's winning games and they've got such a good coaching staff there, it's going to be hard to compete with them head to head. So I think that's one of the things that James Franklin needs to focus on. He's made it known that he wants to try and keep some of the top talent from this state and some of the neighboring states close to him, and it's going to be a challenge. But he's done some good things, and obviously he's lost a couple kids, obviously to Ohio State and Notre Dame just in the last couple of weeks. So those things happen, and I think as long as he's kind of trying to find ways to fill the roster other ways, I think people are going to be okay.
What do you think of Rutgers trying to make a rivalry with Penn State?
Personally, I love it because I live here in the Philadelphia area, so I'm kind of in between Rutgers and Penn State, so I get a little bit of everything. I think it's good. I think as long as if the Big Ten was going to be expanding east, I think that's good for Penn State in terms of rivalries because there are so many Penn State alums and fans in this area, in New Jersey. So you get a lot of back and forth, and I think it's good. It could be healthy. I think Penn State could benefit from having some new rivalries close to home. Maryland and Rutgers are about as close as they can get, I think, as the expansion candidates were. So I like it. I think it could be a lot of fun, and I hope it continues to blossom, I guess.
Okay, I thought of a question since you mentioned you're in the Philadelphia area and we're talking about rivalries. Got to know where you stand on probably the most important question you're going to get this evening. You a Pats or a Geno's guy when it comes to Philly cheesesteak?
Question of the night.
I'm actually a Tony Luke's guy, and I don't know if you guys are familiar with that or not. But I mean, when it comes to people, I don't know how familiar you guys are with Philadelphia, but I mean, to me, the Pats Geno's question always comes up somewhere along the way, and I always tell people, those are the tourist attraction cheesesteak shops. If you want to get a real good cheesesteak, you got to go to a place like Tony Luke's, or find another place. There are a number of great cheesesteak places. Those are two of them, but I think if you want to get a really good cheesesteak without all the hype, there are so many other good options out there.
Okay, I'll have to keep that in mind. This is recorded on the internet, so I'll have this. This is recorded for posterity. The next time I'm in Philadelphia, I'll have to make sure I listen to this podcast.
If I'm ever in Philadelphia, I'll remember to check out Tony Luke's for a Philly cheesesteak. I'm glad you asked that, Chip.
Got me hungry now.
So wrapping this up, the preview, Kevin, what's your predictions for the game? What do you think the final score will look like?
Well, it's not going to be pretty from a Penn State perspective. That point spread was 13.5. I could easily see it being more than that. I think Ohio State just has too much of a complete team compared to what Penn State has the field right now. Maybe Penn State's defense keeps it close early on, but once that second half comes along, Ohio State I can easily see pulling away. 35-17 maybe. I think it could be like that.
Andrew, your final your predictions and final score predictions on this game.
I think it's gonna be a good atmosphere. I went to the game I think 2 years ago when Ohio State was there. It was awesome. It was probably one of the best games I went to, and I think we're gonna see JT shine in that atmosphere. Prediction score, since the offense has just been rolling so well, defense hasn't been playing good, I'm gonna go with Ohio State beats Penn State 45-17.
Chip, your predictions for the game and the final score.
Well, I want to thank Kevin for joining us, and I want to thank him for the information about Tony Luke's. That's extremely important to know. And I'm of the opinion, I know Shannon, his prediction is forthcoming, but I believe that Ohio State's defensive line is, even with James Franklin, I'm sure he's going to do some things creatively to try and get the ball out of Christian Hackenberg's hands as quickly as possible, moving the pocket, maybe some shorter passes, whatever. I think Joey Bosa is really going to put on a clinic on Saturday night. So and it seems like Urban Meyer has an affinity for the number 50. So I'm going to say 56-17. Just again in that continual quest to impress the College Football Playoff Committee, but we'll see.
Shannon, your thoughts how the game will play out and your final score prediction.
Well, while we're watching history unfold before our very eyes, I see another 600-yard game from the Ohio State Buckeyes. I see another 50-point plus game. And unfortunately, I only see 3 points coming out of Penn State. So I'm going 56-3.
Wow.
Dang, Shannon, you're I thought mine was.
And I've been very conservative on a lot of scores.
Yeah, so that's a pretty big score coming from you after last week. The Ohio State Rutgers prediction. I thought mine was going to be a little out there like Shannon's. I'm going to go Ohio State 51, Penn State 10. I think they do get a late touchdown on the board when Ohio State gets second teams in. Ohio State, the offensive line is clicking, the offense is clicking all together, and they're putting up big points. I just don't see Penn State being able to stop them the entire game. Maybe the first couple series, Penn State can get a couple stops. They're in this game, but Barrett's just on fire. I don't see the Penn State secondary being able to slow them down. And the defensive line, I think they just got out of their way with the Penn State offensive line. The way that offensive line's been playing, I thought earlier in the season they might not be too bad, but they crumbled against Michigan, and Michigan's their defense isn't that great this season. So I think Ohio State rolls 51-10. So that's our Ohio State-Penn State preview. Before we close out the show here, be sure to check out MinnesGardenGray.com. We're also, this podcast is on iTunes, MotSaG Live in the search box, and it'll come right up. We also have a link right on the site. Of course, you can follow us all on Facebook, Twitter, Google Plus as well. I have to thank Kevin McGuire for joining us here tonight. We're very thankful for his time. You can check out his work, of course, at NetNewLionsDen.com, and of course he's a contributor for NBC Sports College Football Talk. Can't get that out. But thank you, Kevin, for taking time out of your night to join us and talk a little bit of college football.
Oh, it was my pleasure. Thanks a lot for having me, guys.
Thank you for joining.
Thanks for that tip on Tony Lukes.
No problem. Next time you're in Philly, let me know, and I'll make sure
I will.
Tony Lukes. All right.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thanks for coming on.
Thank you, Kevin.
I reiterate again, thank you for joining us, Kevin. Another great show, as always, our 10th episode. We'll be back again, of course, as always, next week at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. Final thoughts, guys, before we close out the show with our standard song.
Well, Coach Jim Tressel always said that September and October were for pretenders and November is for contenders, and we're getting closer to figuring out who the true contenders are. One more week and we'll be in November down the stretch run. So this is, I guess you want to say, this is kind of a nice dress rehearsal for the stretch run for the Big Ten championship.
You mean the one that's on November 8th?
Like I said, we're approaching it rapidly.
Season's coming quick.
Two freight trains heading straight towards each other.
Yep.
Andrew, Shannon, your final thoughts?
I just wanted to plug, make sure you like us on Facebook, Men in Scarlet and Gray, all the Twitter stuff and everything. If you have any questions for us you want us to answer, hit us up at askmotsag@gmail.com or hashtag askmotsag on Twitter. It's about it's I don't know if anybody saw my tweet earlier, so I'm gonna just keep doing this. But as a Survivors Testicular Tuesday, check your boys out. Never be embarrassed to get your boys checked out. If you find something wrong, you could be a survivor like me.
I'm glad you put that in, Shannon. It's great advice for all the men out there listening to our show. Andrew, your final you got a final thought?
Yeah, I'm very excited for another good weekend of college football, and I just wanted to thank Kevin for joining us, and I wanted to give huge thanks to everyone listening out to the podcast. We all appreciate the support, and thanks for tuning in.
Definitely.
Absolutely.
And Andrew, who's your friend, your Michigan friend?
Oh, yeah, I forgot. If my buddy Richie is still listening, I'd like to give a shout-out to Richie. He is that team up north fan, but, he gave me a text this afternoon and said he was going to listen in. So, Richie, if you're listening, shout-out to you, man. But
we got something special here for you, Richie.
Yeah.
Yes, we do. Another great show as always. And Shannon, play us off like we always do at the end of every show.
Go Bucks!
Go Bucks!
Go Bucks!
Go